conversations with creative people. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to artist Aaron Jack. Aaron works in a number of different mediums and is particularly interested in collaboration. And as part of that, he has a podcast called Artist to Art. If this is your first time watching, first of all, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm your host, Ann Kelly. If this is our first time meeting, you might be wondering who I am. In a nutshell, I'm someone who's been really just into art my entire life. About 20 years ago, I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico to further immerse myself in the art scene and to attend art school. I've now been working in the professional gallery world for about 15 years now. And I started Art in the Raw about halfway through 2020 to keep the inspiration going and to keep everybody connected. You can do me a solid by commenting, liking, and subscribing to the show. If you'd like to know more about the show, please take a look at the description below. There's information about our guest, the show, an interview that I did for Lens Scratch. And if you'd like to know more about me, I was the guest on episode 24. I'll include a link to episode 24 at the end of this episode. But in the meantime, I'm excited to introduce you to Aaron Jack. Welcome, Aaron.
I really appreciate you having me.
Really appreciate you for joining us today.
Anytime.
And where are you today?
I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a little bit in my own head, but really I'm here with you. That's what I'm here for, to be here with you and your audience.
Well, that's awesome. Found you originally through your show, Artist to Art, an interview series you've been doing for about a year now?
Yeah, just over a year now.
And that's all on Instagram Live.
For right now, that's all on Instagram Live.
You record those conversations. So if anybody wanted to go back and listen to all of, did you say 120 interviews you've done so far?
Yeah, 120. Plus I've done many ones as well, but 120 full length ones. And some of those are on the Freedom Tapestry project, which is another project that I've been a part of. So those are once a week. And then mine are anywhere from 1 to 4 times a week on my page. And then I did a series of photography interviews. So I have about 10 of those from the last year where I interviewed amazing National Geographic photographers, and I put together a show in New York City of photographers around COVID. So then I decided to interview 10 of the 15 photographers from around the world, all about their views on COVID. Freedom Tapestry Project is a collaboration with Samia, who's the curator. She's in Damascus, Syria. And then Ben, who's in LA, he's the producer, and then Lena Heedy. So it's the 4 of us for right now working on the project, and I am the interviewer. I show up and I'm there to interview people in the art world, illustration world, technology related. I interviewed one of the heads of layout for Frozen, who works at Disney, people in AR, VR, and then a lot of illustrators from around the world, and letting them share the human stories behind them and their art. I mean, it's all just like me with a cup of tea, sharing these little moments that we have together. So same person, I just kind of that project. I have a curator, my photography on my photography page so far. Where I kind of left it was I was curating a show, and it was like a next step of that photography show. And then I went and took that and I did like a live discussion about those photographers. So it became a way for me to know about those photographers and also share that with the public before I then gave a presentation about the photographers and shared their work in a larger way. And I started the project, actually, the whole interview series, because I was curating a gallery for Fringe Fest here in Pittsburgh. And I decided to interview about half the artists who were part of it. And then it just turned from one, and then I was like, oh, like what parts of this do I really enjoy and what parts can I replicate? The interviews and connecting to the human, and just being that connective experience is the part that I really enjoyed. That I was like, wow, like it's so beautiful to be able to connect to a fellow human being, learn about them, listen. And I would do this anyway in the world, but to do this to do this in a way where it shared those experiences, those human experiences that I had with others. I'd want to have a cup of tea with artists and beautiful humans anyway. That's just like what I love to do. And this became a way to also share little my kind of cups of tea with the world.
I could relate to that. So you said it was called Fringe Fest. I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a
Fringe
little more
Fest.
about that?
Hmm. Yeah, Fringe Fest is the biggest arts festival in the world. So the biggest hub is in Edinburgh, Scotland,
Hmm.
and then there's different sections that happen around the world.
How does that compare to, say, Art Basel?
It's more based around performing arts
Okay.
and like very fringe things. Like people will perform in swimming pools. People will perform like with just like very like different things. So it's very performing arts based, but there are some visual components.
How long has that been? I'm that is new to me.
It's all over the world, and there's all different ones throughout the US, and they kind of like there's touring shows that will go from one section to the next, and
Hmm.
they'll just like make their living by going to different fringe fests around the world. And there's big ones, small ones, start ones that are starting up, but then the biggest one is in Edinburgh, Scotland, and they still in Edinburgh this year haven't heard whether they're going to have it happen. I was talking to Felicitas, who runs this Airbnb, that the guy who wrote Treasure Island, like his family home, she like runs this home and people stay there. So it's like very arts based. And then this big festival happens there, and they're still not sure whether they're going to be able to survive this year.
Sure.
So it's an interesting predicament that this whole thing puts the whole world into. We're all in this together.
A lot of art fairs have gone virtual, but it's a different experience. I think it's better than nothing. I've participated in one anyways, and yeah, totally different. So in terms of your local fair, the satellite version, how did you get involved in that originally?
I met the coordinator and we hit it off, and
Mhm.
she's a doctorate in Fringe Fest, Shayla, and she's amazing. And so I agreed to do lots of different things and put on shows and collaborative efforts and bring different artists together. And it was awesome getting to know, connect with people over time and do one step, two steps, and see what happens. So I became involved in that, and slowly but surely became involved in different things. So it's amazing to be here with you. That's really what it is things lead to other things. And now we're here together, and to be here with you and to be here with your audience, I think that's the most beautiful thing. So thank you. Thank you for reaching out.
No, I love how all of these things are connected. And I mean, that's kind of an interesting aspect of this past year. Did you start your show early pandemic?
Yeah, so that show was in May. So it turned out to be a virtual show.
Hmm.
So I thought in order to make the virtual show actually something, there would have to be other components. And I thought about like what do we really get from the show aspect? It's like, and I thought one of the key parts was getting to know the artist behind the art.
Hmm.
And so that became artist to art.
Yeah. So then you thought, okay, you wanted to expand that beyond what you were doing with Fringe Fest.
Yeah.
Whoever else was out there in the world that you could connect with.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like let's connect with I was like, oh, like I'm doing I've been a photographer for a long time and done a lot of video and social media work, but been a photographer for a long time, and from commercial to fine art. Now I was kind of putting this thing that I've always done in the background, like with the drawing and the painting, and the past year before that, I was really integrating poetry into my photography work and kind of like challenging those boundaries for myself. And I got inspired by this guy, Paul Reps. And he, with his Sumi ink drawings, like the idea of Zen and just like the philosophies behind it, he connected the word with the simple imagery in the Sumi ink. And so I thought, how can I do that? And I was like, oh, it just lit up for me. Like, this is what I was looking for. I was traveling through San Francisco at the time, and my cousin gave me a book, or like he showed me this book, and it just like lit up for me. It just changed my perspective on what I could do. And so I started to integrate poetry, my poetry work that I've been doing for quite a while, into my photography work. And then when the pandemic hit, I was figuring out a way, I guess, what I was missing. And so with these interviews, I was like, okay, how can I take this thing, like what I'm missing and what I felt other people were missing was the connection with another human being,
Mhm.
and what and how to understand that connectivity. And what was that for me as a photographer, to really have connectivity where I photograph people and like and the nuances of the human experience, from the movement to like the movement inside. So I really started to like consider one piece at a time, is how connectivity works, how we could and how connectivity works through the internet, how connectivity works in the modern age. A recent idea that's come to me is from Marshall McLuhan. I was talking to Tony Shafrazy about this. This medium, these different media, it's an extension of the nervous system. And that really takes me back to like, okay, like how am I connecting to people? How are we connected through this nervous system, through the extensions, our senses being an extension of how all of these sensory perceptions, and we're connected together right here right now. Whenever someone's watching this, even, it's like we become extensions in that way. And so I started to really consider some of those ideas in previous versions, and I thought back to my travels through the West Coast, and I started to paint these just beautiful smiles that I was photographing. Because I was really concentrating on photographing these beautiful smiles, and I was writing poetry and just little moments on my Instagram, about the people that I would meet on my travels. And it's just kind of like I was on the road for months and wanted to share just like that there's beautiful moments and beautiful people out there beyond our own experience, maybe, as just like traveling through life. And we didn't need to not necessarily be afraid of the other. And so I took that and I started to paint these portraits of the people that I met. And some of the musicians started to get in touch with me, and some of the other people, like, I started to post them and tag them, and they loved them. And I realized the biggest thing that I got was like that connectivity again. Like, that was the most important thing. Like, the portrait is one aspect, but that we become more connected through that portrait was even more so. And it helped others connect to that person that I painted the portrait of. And that was the interesting thing. It wasn't just my connection with them, it was then sharing that, the shared connectivity. And so I started to work with a Jam Nation in LA, and they have like weekly jams at the Sunset Bar and Grill and some different places. And they started to go on Instagram Live. And so I was like, oh, Instagram Live, I'll go on there. I'm not sure which I started first, the interviews or like doing Instagram Live with them. but I just started painting. I was like, oh, like I just needed a release from all of this. I was like, oh, I was like, I'm painting with Sumi ink. I'm gonna put Sumi ink on the paper. And I started to just like play around with it, like during the live music.
Then more recently, you've been collaborating with different musicians on Instagram Live where you've been painting and they've been playing. And
Well, that's exactly what happened.
so
Is
that's where that came from.
exactly. It was just simply like they were playing music and I was painting live, and then I was like, this is the moment. This is the moment that we were painting. I was painting. There were musicians, and we're doing our thing, and I was excited, and then I began to recognize what that was my ability to connect with the music and into the paint, and this carbon became this connectivity to know that the tree really did fall in the forest, that there was a connectivity, that like the this whole, because I was working on these whole abstract drawings for years since I was working on a very particular series. I was working on a lot of them for years, but like in the last about few years I started them when I was lost in a desert in India. Started like drawing these abstract drawings which has like other sorts of elements of like mapping, and so this became kind of the space, the carbon that exists to know that we exist even though we're through the digital format. We still exist. There's still a tactileness. There's still carbon in that connective, and that became my first solo show, the Carbon Connection. My first solo painting media show. I've had photography solo shows, but that
But
way,
yeah, genre.
yeah, in
But
that,
backing up a little bit, you mentioned being lost in the desert.
yeah.
Can we go a little more into that? You say that so casually, like I went to the grocery store and then I felt like I should paint the pineapple.
These things happen.
These things happen, but I'm curious and I want to know more. So
Okay.
I assume other people might as well.
Well, I was traveling through India for a while, going on adventures, and saw a lot of things and watched life go by and sat in the Himalayas and contemplated life for a while, and was down in the south of India and just like lived on riverboats for a while.
How long did that go on for?
I think that's the interesting thing about time. There's the chronos, which is the chronological time, and then the kairos, which is like the moment of now, the opportune moment, as the Greeks call it. And that was a moment of now where all the things happened in an amount of time that could only be described by the heart. So that in chronological time was 6 months about, but it felt like centuries, like lifetimes passed me by. Like I'd meditate at the bottom of this pool in the desert, and the most beautiful things and imageries came to me sitting inside, just the bars on the window and the 115 degrees heat outside. It really pushed me to find my own mental states where I could find myself. And I think that's the most interesting thing. So through the series of Sumi Inc., it's kind of like a continuation. I started to represent these the way I view time and the way I view mapping and traveling and connectivity inside these abstract drawings. That has kind of led me to this place where I see space and the connectivity of us through these digital environments where it's like, how do we know that we exist? What's the sound of one hand clapping? So it gave me just like, how do I explore that idea further and take that into a way that could be connective to where we are right now? Because that's the most important thing. How do we bring right now, whenever now is, to connect back to the beginning of time itself, to the beginning of carbon, to where the carbon hit the rice paper and we tasted and became ourselves to become what we are now. So it's kind of, how do we take the opportune moment of now and connect that back to the beginning of time?
I love that. You note Zen philosophy and you speak a little bit about chi. So that makes me kind of curious a little more about your kind of meditation process, or how that's part of your life, part of your work.
Meditation for me is an ongoing process, ever developing. And I think it's the process of developing that it comes to be. And that's the same with art making, it's ever evolving.
Mhm.
And that's the most beautiful thing for me, to see the cosmos, or what I see and what you see, the map of your universe mapped onto the sheet of paper. That's magic. But that's not the art process. So that's a whole other aspect. I think that's kind of similar for meditation, is the process. What is the meditation of now? The meditation of drinking a cup of tea, the meditation of talking while drinking, talking and then drinking a cup of tea and then talking. It's an ever evolving process.
I think
Mhm.
just making those Sumi paintings would be meditative.
That's exactly it. Is life is a meditation. Every step is a meditation, or at least it can be. We can all have it as is how deeply do we go into every single step? The thing that got me started on this through the pandemic, I remember my friend Sora, beginning of the pandemic, she was in my art in the art show that I curated beginning of the pandemic, and she just said, bare feet on the ground, one step at a time. So I've just taken that one step at a time, bare feet. And so, like yesterday, I can say, for instance, I walked up to the top of a grassy knoll and on a golf course, and it's just beautiful. And I just played my flute into the distance. And every breath, the meditation, every note, intention of letting it be as it is. And it might be different today, it might be different tomorrow. And that's the beautiful thing. That's the
Sure.
process.
And I was curious if you played music, because you seem to have an interest in collaborating with other musicians. You also worked with or worked for a pretty predominant jazz musician, Richie Cole, for a number of years. So flute, that's part of your personal.
It's part of my personal thing. It's a,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, I don't know, right now I play flute, another time I do this other thing. It's like, what do we do? It's like, and then we go to the grocery store and we, sometimes we want blue cheese, sometimes we like Gouda, and gotta enjoy life. I'll put it this way. I work with a lot right now. I'm working with on Clubhouse with a lot of different musicians and collaborators, audio engineers, and we each bring this magic to our spaces. And I think at the end of the day, it's about the humanity that we all bring. At some point, it's a skill set, and at some point, that all breaks down to just be human with each other. And I think when we can all find a way to be human with each other and drink a cup of tea and put our differences aside, there will be a little bit more peace in the world. And so I say that as like, I play the flute, but it's just like, it's a fun thing for me. But when I'm with these musicians, I put that aside, and I say some poetry that comes to me in the spur of the moment. But it just depends. It's the world comes as it needs to. Life is beautiful.
but I am curious how you met Richie Cole, and more of the story of kind of that relationship. I've looked at photographs you've made of him, and tell us more.
was photographing dance for a long while, and I decided that what more to photograph inside the motion, inside the self, than the music itself, and how beautiful it would be to see the motion inside and what that is inside a musician, to see the music. And so I just started going and showing up to where music was happening in the bigger way, like in on stages and outside, and started to go see a lot of jazz musicians. And then I met Mark Perna, and I started photographing for all these different musicians. And when I came back to Pittsburgh through my life, I photographed for Mark Perna. I photographed Mark Perna and moved back with a video camera. And then Richie Cole showed up on the scene, and I started on the project. So Mark Perna is the producer, and then Richie Cole, and then there's Reggie Watkins and Vince Taglieri on the drums, and all of these different, and Rick Matt, and we have all of these. It was a band. It was a band, and George Hyde Studios, and Jim Barr was the audio engineer, and we just like all became a thing. And so for years, just like all working together, and it was a Richie Cole project, and and I learned a lot from him. He's quite the experience in the world and taught me a lot, and it was a good interesting experience over the years. I'm very happy to have learned from him and be where I'm now. He passed away in May, and so I just decided to turn the camera on myself with the pandemic, since I'd been photographing and doing videos of him and the band, and and decide what would it be if I were on the camera. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on the camera and experience this side.
And it's been interesting in this past year, just in different ways of connecting with people. I found you because I had artist Gabe Wise on my show, and then I saw David mentioned on Instagram that he was going to be on your show, and so naturally I listened to it and then started following you after that. Have watched a number of your other shows, and then we're both on Clubhouse. Like I said, I've kind of only scratched the surface. I've mostly been a listener. But there was a funny thing yesterday where I was in preparation for this conversation. I was listening to one of your conversations on Instagram, but I get the push notifications from Clubhouse. So I was sitting there listening to you talk on Instagram, but I was getting a push notification that you were also on Clubhouse. I was like, Erin's everywhere. So it's kind of this interesting new virtual world that I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I think the pandemic has definitely accelerated it. I think it's kind of cool, the different networks we can form and the different people we can connect with. I mean, not that we wouldn't have done this in 2019, but we weren't. I mean, the fact of the matter is we weren't doing it in 2019. It took 2020 to inspire both of us to do what we're doing today.
I think that's the beautiful thing, is that it took all of the things to happen for us to be here right now.
Mm-hmm.
All of these world events, all of the little aspects, like that we both reached out to Gabe,
Mm-hmm.
and all that he must have gone through in order for us to both be like, hey Gabe, why don't you be part of our different shows?
We've kind of started these different communities to keep people connected.
I think it's interesting, as I've seen the different communities pop up, and what and reconsider what community can be.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, that's what I think about, is like what community can be. And Clubhouse is, it's like the moment that the book on surrealism got published, and I'm experiencing that moment. and reconsidering what does it mean to communicate? What does it mean to have community in certain ways? What does it mean to be connected in this day and age? What does it mean to be a human in this day and age? I'm reconsidering all of this based on Clubhouse. I mean, Instagram Live and all of these interviews changed my view, and Clubhouse is changing it again. And it's all like how it maps onto my art. All of a sudden, I'm drawing live and audio, and then there's audio visual connectivity. I run a club called the Art Collab, and it's all about bringing different like visual artists, musicians, writers, dancers, all technologists, just interesting people who want to be part of collaborate art collaborations together, and then seeing what kind of spins out of that. I can go into like how I think Clubhouse can be used right now, but it's changing by the moment. It's a changing sea that the sea by itself is calm, but the winds are ever changing.
For people who aren't familiar, can you describe Clubhouse?
It's like the university without walls. Anybody can make their own room. Anybody can say, this is a space. Anybody can show up. Here are the rules of the space. And so we're here in the university without walls. What do we do with it is the question. This gives us the connectivity to university professors around the world and the ability to connect. I think most people see it as just the ocean, but when we understand the water as lakes and valleys, rivers and streams, that we can play and we can create our own little areas and control it as we see fit, that we can form the rivers and streams ourselves. We can form those connections that.
Who is Aaron Jack? I get to listen to you talk to all of these other artists, but it becomes about the person you're talking to. You get a little insight usually into, okay, who you are, but I was curious, honestly, to know more about that. And like I said, just to kind of connect with other like-minded people. I feel like we're kind of exploring similar things, but in different platforms, in different ways. And then there's also our photography connection. So I mean, I'm a little bit curious about your photography story, how you got into photography. You mentioned you're doing a little bit of fine artwork as well as some commercial work. You've been published in a lot of major publications over the years. So what is that story?
My folks took me on travels when I was young to like Europe, and kind of like on the low budget, kind of like traveling through Europe, Rick Steve style, when I was young. And I took my camera and I loved it. And I was just intensely curious and would spend hours at all of the museums around Europe, and then would go out and take photographs. That was just my love, traveling, going to art museums, creating art, and going and observing and photographing. So it's just been always like part of me, and connecting with the people that I'd meet. Took a lot of summer classes from elementary school, middle school, high school, like summer camps. And then high school was like majored in art, like 3 hours of art every day, and interned with my high school photography teacher, and interned in New York City with Lois Greenfield and Matt Karras, and like dance photography. And I worked on that at Point Park and photographed dancers day in and day out. Like, has always been my life, and journalism became a little part of it. Shooting for commercial and architectural work became a part of it. It's just like flowed in and out. Photographing jazz musicians became a major part of it for a while. And my camera is attached to me. It hasn't like left my side for years. I think I took off maybe 6 weeks in college, and my trigger finger started to tremble, and then I brought it back. Finding my balance with it has always been a thing. it's just a part of me that is inseparable. And it's not even the photographing itself, it's the observation. For periods of time, I've taken away the method just to see like what would it be without that singular method? What would it be without this camera? What would it be without the camera itself? What would it be if, same thing, like what would it be if I did a meditation underwater? What would it be if I meditated at the top of a hillside? Like what would it be if I walked barefoot through the frozen tundra? Like it's it's a meditation, and it's and I like to share those meditations and hopefully bring that, like the moments that have affected me and the moments that allow others to be affected in a positive way into the world. So it's just a way that I can be the change that I want to see in the world.
Photography generally is pretty technical. The difference in making a photograph, making a sumi painting, practice is very different. Photography is so technical and just drawing and just kind of the free form. I see them being kind of two different very sides to a brain or something like that.
I think it's only once we're able to drop the technical that it becomes real. The camera is an extension of my nervous system. Like I know the knobs, I know the dials, like I know the fingers on my hand. Like it's know where I know what my settings need to be as an extension of myself.
Right. It's like a mastery of the craft.
Exactly.
Playing a piano or driving stick shift, and you're not thinking about how do I get into second gear.
Right. It's like you're driving down the road. You're not thinking about like I'm pressing the brake now. I'm gonna press the gas now. I'm going to like do this. And the camera can have a lot more components in a lot of ways. The mastery is only the first step for the camera to have the intentional experience and understand inside and be able to see. Right,
You're
right.
involved in a lot of collaborative things, which I think is great.
I kind of take a lot of inspiration from like the beat poets and really look at like what is happening and like things like that, or like when times were that great collaborations happened. So I have different art collabs that are happening, and then they join other groups and become intermixed, and I just enjoy being in the mix of the moment and involving others and exploring where that goes. I'm really, it excites me to know that we're in this together and let's work together to make this a better world. And I think that's just like I feel a duty to be part of the bringing us there together. And so that's another thing behind my interview series is let's just listen to people a little bit more. Let's give people a little bit more of a chance to find some depth where we're able to find more understanding and work together. Just for everybody who's watching who is just signing up for Clubhouse or who has been on for a little while, and find the people who resonate with you and really learn from them and connect them together. Be a connector of the wonderful people that you meet, open up rooms, learn to be a good facilitator, because that's sorely needed in that space is good facilitation, and that takes a lot. I've been working at it very hard since I've been on, and there's a lot that goes into being a good facilitator, and it can be a life practice for people. It is a life practice for people to be a good facilitator, to be a good host of a dinner party or tea party or what have you. That's an art. There's an art to the facilitation, and to really take that seriously and delve into the Clubhouse, find the people that you'd like to facilitate those connections with, bring them together. I think that's the power. That's the power of us to build communities. That's the power of us to build communities together. I'd like to do that. I've brought together leaders of different spaces and from the NFT space to the to different spiritual spaces and flow spaces and just different leaders and brought them together to have in-depth conversations. That interests me and that informs my work. Every moment of space that I put onto the page is informed by those little tiny moments that have affected me, that I've allowed to affect me, the beauty that I see that has come from those connective experiences. And from that, I'm able to put that onto the page and share that observation with others. I'm able to see that in the world because I'm able to facilitate that. So that's why that skill set is so interesting, intriguing to me. But I think we all have the ability to be facilitators now within Clubhouse and to facilitate community. And the more that we take that seriously as an art form, facilitation, and really connect that with like intentionality and the same intentionality that we bring to our art and bring that back into our art, I think that we will grow and like, and the more that we're able to bring the intentionality of like the joy and the peacefulness and harmony and getting to know each other as human beings, the same things that I bring to my art and the meditations, that the more we're able to bring that to each other and bring that to community, I think the world is going to be a better place. So I'd just like to encourage everybody out there to go beyond their maybe current communities and reach out and find the people to bring together and connect at a human level.
The ability to have that reach beyond your local community, people from all over the planet. No one from Mars on Clubhouse yet. I think you might invite them.
Eventually, there's there's some interesting people. There's people who design sound and all of that from Mars and do interesting things, who have had their senses out there on Mars in very interesting ways. And we're able to reach out into space and we're also able to reach in. And I'm happy with that. It's an exploration, it's life.
It's all an exploration. And one of my favorite questions that I like to ask guests on the show is about time travel. So you've done a certain amount of traveling. You could time travel anywhere, past or present. Where would that be?
Well, I think the interesting thing about any of this, about any of the art, is we're able to go back to that place in time with our intentionality, is that we're able to see and we're able to view it. And in that way, it is time travel. When you put this together and you're editing it, you're viewing it, and you're time traveling back to where we are right now.
Thought about that actually.
It's interesting because you've thought about that in the past, and that just brought you back to that moment. And then when you view this in the future, you'll then be back in this moment and then be back in that moment. When you ask me the questions, I brought us back to interesting moments that I wanted to time travel. The whole conversation, I was time traveling.
You often bring us back to now.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about time travel. We can go there, we can be in any moment, but we're always there now. Whatever that is, it's for now. It's like just that, I think, is the most beautiful thing.
So on the travel note, of all of the places you've ever traveled, is there a favorite place?
One of my favorite places was meditating at the bottom of a pool when I was lost in the desert.
That was India.
Yeah, in India. But I have many places that I just like love. I love walking through the streets with the Pied Piper at night in Montreal with the full moon and the beautiful murals just getting painted on the walls. There's so many places that I love in this world. And when I hope through my work, I'm able to share some of those moments, some of those inner experiences. As the art making practice, it's able to bring people a little piece of the magic that I've felt in the world.
Well, I believe art to be transformative. I think that's an important aspect to it, being able to share that. So one of the questions I like to ask, and I'm kind of curious how you're going to answer this, is about things you might collect. Do you collect anything?
Collections. That's an interesting thing.
And some people don't think they collect things, and then they think about it for a minute. And then all of a sudden they collect a lot of things.
Collective experiences. I have collections of art, collections of visions that I've traveled through the world, and I've collected moments of experience that I'm able to time travel to at any point in time. The interview series is a collection, collections of connectivity. I mean, I can go more in depth, but collections of connectivity.
I like that too. It doesn't always have to be a physical thing. Like, well, I really enjoyed talking to you, Erin. Do you have any shout outs, plugs, anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to put out there?
Shout out to future selves and to, okay, so follow me on the Art Collab on Clubhouse, the Art Collab Club, at Aaron Jack on Clubhouse, Aaron Jack Line Art on Instagram. From there you can find other links and websites and Instagrams, all of that. And Jam Nation Thursday nights at 12 a.m. 12 a.m. EST. I'm usually on there painting live. Thursdays on the Freedom Tapestry Project. Usually, not always, but usually 12 p.m. EST. So that's another thing. So that's Thursday afternoons. Thursday nights is on the Jam Nation. Tuesdays is usually on Aaron Jack Line Art, my lives on Instagram. And then I'm on Clubhouse. So that's where you can find me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoyed talking to you. Perhaps we collaborate on something else in the future. But,
that would be wonderful.
Oh, and then we also have to give a shout out to Gabe Wise.
Oh, of course, Gabe.
How we initially connected.
Right. Oh yeah. Shout out to Gabe. Gabe, yeah. You're awesome.
Yeah.
And get Gabe on Clubhouse. He's got new NFTs all the time.
Oh yeah, he's killing it.
I appreciate you keeping me on task with a cup of tea. I appreciate you doing what you do.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you, and nice to meet you, and have a good night, and talk soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
I hope you've enjoyed tonight's conversation with Aaron Jack. If so, please do me a solid, like, comment, and subscribe. I've got some great content coming up in the future, and I'd love to share it with you. Have a good night and keep the inspiration going.